would pay attention to what is being said in the Hebrew language and not just casually scratch the surface to satisfy our guilt. Are you hearing me? And that's what a lot of people do. Well, oh my goodness, I haven't studied the Torah the last couple of weeks, so I'll just go read 15 chapters real quick and make up for it. Well, it's really not done you any good. Can I be honest with you? Reading's great. Reading's great. But the vast majority of the time, if you're just reading, you're not gleaning a lot. You would be better served to take just a couple of verses and break it down and see what's being said, and then go back and meditate it, ruminate in the night season, and ask Yahweh to show you what you've been missing, and be prepared for your world to get rocked. Can you say amen? We were just looking in Hebrew at the word for priest, which is Cohen, and we found out it's far more than just the surface understanding of an individual who just officiates in a religious ceremony. The word Cohen means that I'm to instruct the people in such a fashion that they will understand they're charged with being like him. And if we understood that, there would be a lot less of us standing here. Hello? We would wait for him to anoint us and appoint us than be self-appointed. And that's what happens. It's become a professional obligation. And you can find that a lot of times, and I may be taking a license here, but I can say that. You'll find that a lot of times individuals that are usurping this office, it has become a job to them rather than what they are and who they are. There's no quit. There's no retiring. You have an obligation as a mediator between Yahweh and the people. And your primary obligation is to minister to him, the husband. Now, as we began to look at this word Cohen, we found that the numerical value of that word is the number 75. And of course, you could take the number 75 and you could see the number 5 that we were talking about earlier in this number as well. 5 being the number associated with the Hebrew letter Hey, which is an imperative. It's telling you, pay attention, something's about to be revealed. It means anytime you see the Hebrew letter Hey attached to a word or a string of words, that letter will tell you revelation is here if you want it. Here it is. Come and get it. Amen? We almost went a different direction. I hope y'all can grasp what I'm trying to say. 75 happens to be the age of Avraham. And I know you're probably wondering, how does that connect to tonight's Torah portion? Talking about building a perpetual fire and maintaining a perpetual fire on an altar. Abraham was 75 when he left his homeland, the place where pagan idolatrous practices was well known. The name of the place was which is a Hebrew word for light, of the Chaldees. The root of the word Chaldea is the word chesed, which is inferring, because it was a pagan idolatrous place full of people who were prostituting themselves to the fallen gods. It was the source of the light of false mercy, or a false light of false mercy. Of Chaldea. Sounds a lot like what we have been experiencing in some of the churches and congregations across the world. There's a false light regarding false mercy and false grace being propagated, and no wonder Yahweh told Abraham, come out of there. Well, this particular number 75 is associated with it, and you remember the name of the individual that owned the location of this, where this altar is at, that we're talking about in this Torah portion. His name was Ornan the Jebusite. Again, Ornan means perpetual light, or light perpetuated. Did you know the enemy masquerades as an angel of light? Amen. The root stem of the word Ornan is Aleph Resh. You could pronounce it R. And that word, even though the name means light perpetuated, the root word R, listen to this, means a barren, and desolate place. It sounds just like Genesis chapter 1, where there's a tohu vabohu, waste and desolate place, and Yahweh says, you know what? I'm going to bring perpetual light. I'm going to bring ornan into the waste and desolate place. And as we were looking this past week in the Torah portion, we found out that the threshing floor and the foundational stone was synonymous with the place where seed is brought to be interjected into the bride. Remember Ruth and Boaz? Where did they meet? The threshing floor. What did he do? He covered her with the kanaf, the wings of his garment. Isn't that just like Yahweh? The interesting thing is that the threshing floor was also synonymous with the place known as the potter's wheel. And the word for potter's wheel is the same, goren, as the word threshing floor, and it's also the same word that was used back in Exodus to talk about the birthing stool that the midwife would set the Hebrew mothers on. It's the place where seed is interjected, where conception takes place and birthing occurs. That's what's important about the threshing floor. That's what's important about the place where this altar is located, because a perpetual fire and light are synonymous with seed. Are you with me? And so when you start looking at how the Father's connecting all of this, He's telling you the place known as being owned by an individual, or none, the Jebusite. And if you go back and look at the word Jebusi or Yebusi, it's also talking about a barren place. The implication, a place that's being tread down and trampled down. Well, it's telling us basically the very location that was barren and would be tread down by Yahweh would also be a place where conception would take place. And I was sharing this past week in the radio broadcast, that's the same way that the word wilderness is defined throughout the book of Exodus. The children of Israel were taken into the wilderness, and in English the word wilderness means a barren, sterile, arid place where nothing can live, and yet in Hebrew it's midbar. It's the place of the word. Go figure. Can you see how this is connected to this Torah portion? The very place where desolation should have been, the very place that should have been barren. As a matter of fact, the priest is charged with going into the place that had at one time been barren, where the fire had been extinguished. Because see, Adam was the first man laid out on the earth, and his fire was put out. And so now you're being charged with keeping that fire in Adam kindled, the temple man. Can y'all see that? It's not an accident that Aaron was the one being told to keep this fire kindled, because Aaron was who? The high priest, the light bearer, the light bringer. Leviticus chapter 6 says, and the priest shall put. The word put here is the word labash. It's translated as garments. But it's also spelled with the same 3 consonantal root letters, lamed, beit, shin, which is used metaphorically, pronounced lebush. You can see it in Malachi chapter 2, where it talks about not covering your garment with violence. That word garment is lebush, and it's a metaphor that means wife. Did you hear what I just said? So there's a connection here with the high priest in this particular instance, and the high priest being the mediator between the people and Yahweh, and the fact that the high priest and something regarding this bride is also being mysteriously hidden from the casual observer. It tells us that the priest shall put on his garment, the linen garment. Did y'all see that? And the priest shall put on his linen garment, and his linen breeches shall be put upon his flesh, and he's supposed to take up the ashes which the fire has consumed with the burnt offering on the altar, and he shall put them beside the altar. The word for garment here is Strong's number 4055, mem dalet, pronounced made, but it can also mean armor, judgment, and stature. So the high priest is supposed to put on the armor of Yahweh. And by putting on the armor of Yahweh, you achieve the measure of the stature, sounds like Ephesians 4:13, of the fullness of that man called Messiah. It infers that you're in a process of maturation, a process of being perfected until we achieve that stature. Garment, priesthood. And by the way, Ephesians chapter 6 talks about putting on the armor as well. And in Hebrew, I believe it would have been the same thing we're talking about here. I believe Paul was given instructions in Ephesians chapter 6 when it talks about how to resist the enemy, that you were to do it by putting on the whole armor of Yahweh so that you could be able to stand in the evil day. I believe he's making a reference to what's taking place here in this Torah portion. Now I want to look at the word ashes, and I got to be careful here with my southern drawl. Strong's number 1880. The word is pronounced deshen, and it's translated as fat ashes. I don't know why y'all laughing. The ashes of the fat of the sacrifice that had been burned. Fat ashes. It's different here than the usual word for ash, which is the word afar, which is translated as ash or dust. The word deshen or deshen also means, listen to this, to be fresh, to be thriving, to anoint, to be fertile, to be nourished. And if you break the word apart, you'll notice the dalet at the front of it. And of course, the dalet is the word Hebrew letter which means door. And you'll notice the sheen nun. The sheen represents a tooth, as in something that's about to devour or to consume, but it also depicts the ability to change and to learn in the process. So thus, as the sacrifice was consumed, listen to me, we're changed, having been brought to the learned one who made us alive and shimmened us. We became fat ashes. We were oiled with the fat from off the altar, making us anointed and fertile in the process. This verse tells us, as the bride, we're to put on the garment of Messiah, the priesthood, and we are to be obedient in our duties. We become an offering ourselves, made alive, anointed, and fertile, and we are changed into His image. And the obligation that we have, responsibilities that we have, do not end with just ourselves. We're told that immediately upon making sure the fire has been stoked, we're to take the ashes and do what? Go outside the camp. Take the fat ashes and go outside the camp. Leviticus chapter 6, verse 11. And he shall put off his garments and put on other garments. I know y'all enjoying yourself. You can't hardly stand it. And carry forth the ashes without the camp unto a clean place. What does that have to do with changing garments? Did you notice what was taking place there? From the moment that he stokes the fire and he gathers the ashes, he has to stop and change his garments. So there's a change that occurs. If you'll stoke the fire and take care of moving the ashes and make a determination to go from there outside the camp with it, there's a change of garments that's necessary to fulfill this obligation. What does that mean? Well, let's look at it. And he shall put off. That phrase in Hebrew is Strong's number 6584. You remember back earlier where I told you in verse 10 it says, and he shall put. Well, here it says he shall put off, and it's a different word. It's not labash. Here it's the word pashat. And if you're familiar with this Hebrew term, the word pashat is the basic, fundamental, foundational level of studying the Hebrew word. The pashat level, so just basic, what you can just see right on the surface. The word pashat literally means something that's kind of spread out in front of you. Are y'all still with me? The root of the word pashat is Strong's number 6580. It's the word pas. And it's a noun that means wickedness and strong rebellion. And then again it says, and he shall put off his garments. Remember earlier the word for garment was the word made up there in verse 10, but in this instance the word garment is beged. It's translated as clothing, but this word beged or beged can also mean deceit and treachery. You notice there's something about putting off deceit and treachery and wickedness and strong rebellion before you take the fat ashes outside the camp. Are you with me?